two cities. Immediately after the fall, Genesis chapter 4 focuses on the first two children, Cain, the firstborn son, and Abel. Even though Cain was the older son, Abel was favored by God. Cain responds to this favoritism that he saw was unjust, not with happiness and gratitude that his brother is so loved by God, but rather with spiritual envy, with sadness that his brother is favored and not him. Out of envy, Cain then murders Abel. God's favoritism of Abel over Cain was not without rational basis. As indicated by Petrie, it is important to note that Abel is described as offering the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions, while Cain only offers an offering the fruit of the ground. If this detail is overlooked, then it might seem that God is favoring Abel for no reason. However, when this detail is reflected upon, it becomes evident that the passage implies Abel was sacrificed, offered to God, that which was most precious from his flock, the firstborn, and that which was most precious of their meat, the fat. In contrast, Cain merely offers some fruit of the ground without taking the extra care to offer the first, the best of what he has cultivated. After Cain murders his brother, God asks Cain where Abel is. Cain responds with, "I do not know, am I my brother's keeper?" Hamilton comments that the Hebrew word for keeper comes from the word to guard, watch, and preserve, shamar, the same word that is used for Adam's vocation to guard the garden, especially since Eve, the woman Adam is to love, is present in the garden. The verb shamar and its associated noun indicate the keeper is a master in relationship to what he's guarding and watching over. And yet this type of relationship is not the fraternal relationship Cain was to have with his brother. As Hamilton points out, this relationship is appropriate for zoos, bees, and prisoners, but not between brothers. The fratricide is immediately followed by Cain establishing a city called Enoch, named after Cain's son. Cain's fourth generation descendant, Lamech, is the first man identified by the Bible who is married to more than one wife, Ada and Zillah. Ada's son Jubal is called the father of all who play the lyre and the pipe. Zillah's son, Tubal-Cain, was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. In other words, according to Petrie, instruments of war. This verse is followed by Lamech boasting to his wives of his 77-fold vengeful anger represented by killing a man who only wounded him. As St. Augustine teaches, Cain's city is founded by a man who murdered his brother, and furthers Petrie, known for beginning polygamy, for its vengeful, warlike spirit and its development of entertainment. For Augustine, the city of Cain represents the fallen city of man, while Abel represents the city of God. These two cities undergo in this world a series of deaths and births. Biblical founders of the violent, this world-centered, death and pleasure-driven city of man are Cain, Enoch, Ham, Noah's son, Ishmael, Abraham's son. The founders of the peaceful, otherworld-directed, life-affirmative, prayerful, moral, God-centered city of God are Abel and Seth, Adam's sons, Shem, Noah's son, Isaac, Abraham's son, and definitively, in its fullest sense, Jesus Christ. The two cities are depicted in the Old Testament as dying and being reborn, since, writes Augustine, in the wicked war with the wicked, some of the cities of the city of God in its imperfect state on earth are seduced by the wicked, corrupted, and destroyed. A seduction of members in the city of God by the idolatrous, violent, lustful city of man is described in Genesis chapter 6 with, "The sons of God, the descendants of Seth, came into the daughters of men, the descendants of Cain, and they bore children to them." In Hebrews, the expression "came into" is a typical expression for sexual intercourse. Upon seeing the citizens of the city of God becoming more and more like the city of man, God then decides to blot out man from the face of the ground, except for Noah, who is just and favored by God. A verse that follows God's decision to blot out man describes the extent of man's corruption. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon earth. Genesis 6:11 through 12. In focusing on the word corrupt in this verse, Hamilton observes that it comes from the Hebrew word root destroy, shakath. Hamilton comments, I quote, "Is this one way by which God destroys? Rather than to interrupt and impede, he allows the evil started by humankind to run its inevitable conclusion." Similarly, the Apostle Paul, in speaking of the expression of God's wrath against sin, uses the expression, God gave them up. Surely more passive than active, more gentle than raging. Another interesting detail that Hamilton comments on is that God's first reaction to the corruption and wickedness of man is not to angrily blot out man. Rather, his initial reaction is grief. It grieved him to his heart. We can interpret this as meaning God suffering with man, and this suffering will find its perfect, visible expression in Jesus, who is Emmanuel, meaning in Hebrew, God with us. The power that enables the citizens of the corrupt city of man to be terrifying and giant-like indicates Petrie from the fallen angels, principally Satan, represented in Genesis 3 by a serpent. For this reason, interprets Petrie, Ezekiel in chapter 28 identifies the power behind the corrupt king of Tyre with the one who was in Eden, the garden of God, who is blameless till iniquity was found in you, who is filled with violence and sinned. Ezekiel 28:13 through 16. Reflecting the belief in an angelic world that interfaces with worldly politics, Paul cautions Christians from becoming overly engaged in battling with political forces of this world. For we are not contending against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Ephesians 6:12.